Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I welcome this opportunity to address you on this highly topical and sensitive issue, keeping everything in its proper perspective as well. I still believe that we have one, as a European Union, we have one of the best food safety systems in the world, which does not mean, of course, that incidents do not arise and that lessons should be learned from these incidents. And over the past 10 days, I have addressed both the Parliament's Agricultural and Rural Development Committee and the Agricultural Council on this matter. And on both these occasions, I want to start today the same way as I started in those events, that from the evidence we have gathered to date in relation to the scandal, there does not seem to be a public health or food safety issue, but one of fraudulent labelling rather than one of safety. Because as you know, horse meat can be an ingredient, a legitimate ingredient for the production of minced meat and meat preparations, provided it is declared on the label. And those who eat meat have a right to know whether it is beef, whether it is pork, whether it is horse meat. And I'll just give you a brief synopsis of where we currently stand. Food business operators who have actual control of products and processes on the ground necessarily bear the primary responsibility for ensuring that the requirements of European food law are met. When I was asked who is responsible as a country, at that time when the issue erupted, there were 4 countries through which beef lasagna had passed through. And I was very careful not to mention any one of them, because initially everyone was looking in one direction and suddenly everyone was looking in another direction. So I was very careful not to mention names, and I said any country through which these meat products has passed and any company and food operator who has been involved in the production, distribution and storage of these meat products is technically liable to suspicion. And thank God that I said so, because then it resulted that it was in another direction that the investigations were evolving. And the member states that are responsible for ensuring the proper day-to-day enforcement of the European Union rules. And once any food product of whatever origin is placed on the European market, it is the responsibility of member states to check whether or not the product presents a risk and whether it complies with applicable legislation. And it is true that the Commission has the Food and Veterinary Office, which does not inspect itself, but it audits the inspectors in the member states, mostly on food safety issues. So, for instance, even outside the European Union, if we are going to import meat from Brazil or from Argentina, the FVO in Ireland goes, it happens to be in Ireland, it's not like it's a Commission's institution, it visits the slaughterhouses of Brazil and Argentina and only approves those slaughterhouses which can export to the European Union. And then we also have the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, the RASF, which worked rather well in the system, because even though technically it's limited to food safety issues, on this issue, the moment there were the incidents from Ireland and from the United Kingdom, they were immediately transmitted for notification purposes to all the member states. And the Commission will shortly present an overview report on the audits which the FVO has organized, mostly from a hygiene perspective. Now, all findings of the discovery of horse meat labelled as beef in certain processed food products were communicated immediately through the RASF system, and Europol is coordinating also the fraud investigations, and all member states have been asked to keep Europol contact points fully informed of developments. If I can give a short timeline of what happened, we first had the incident in Ireland, followed immediately on the 8th of February by the incident in the United Kingdom. On the 13th of February, on the 8th of February, then on the 13th of February, the Irish presidency, with the concurrence of the Commission, held an emergency meeting of a small group of states which were directly member states which were directly affected by this scandal. The Commission then proposed to the Standing Committee on the Food Chain a series of food inspections which will start tomorrow. Some have started even earlier, for a period of 30 days, with the possibility of extension for a further 2 months. This was on the 15th. On the 19th, this proposal was adopted, and then it was even confirmed by the Agricultural Council on the 5th of February. So the reaction was immediate to this crisis. And we are still very active as a Commission at both political and technical levels. Shall I explain perhaps in some detail the intensive monitoring plan which will start immediately? There are 2 series of tests in all member states. First, extensive DNA testing on beef products to check for the presence of horse meat, so to check whether the labelling legislation as regards the animal ingredients have been observed. There will be thousands of inspections, depending on the size of the member state, the population, the number of slaughterhouses, the number of horse meat produced. Incidentally, all the member states produce horse meat except Estonia. So all the member states do produce horse meat, and of course they export it or consume it themselves. And the second verification would be for the absence of phenylbutazone, commonly known as bute, in horse meat in slaughterhouses or at the border. Just to give you some statistics, 70% of all horse meat in the European Union is produced within the European Union, and 30% is imported from outside the European Union, mostly Brazil, Argentina, and Canada and Mexico. And these tests will be carried out for a period of 1 month, with the possibility of extension for a further 2 months, and the first results should be reported to the Commission by the 15th of April. And I have given the commitment to publish these results immediately. It is useless organizing, financing, co-financing inspections and then hiding the results from the general public, because I believe that only the strictest and most complete transparency can begin to repair the damage done to consumer confidence. The number of tests will be, as I said, proportionate, and a recommendation containing the full details of these monitoring tests was supported by the member states. As regards phenylbutazone, it is recommended to take 1 sample for every 50 tons of horse meat slaughtered or imported, with a minimum of 5 samples per member state, and we are co-financing to the tune of 75%. Mr. President, when a scandal such as this comes to light, it is perhaps understandable that some jump to the conclusion that the legislative system must be at fault and that fundamental change must surely follow. However, in this case, the traceability of fraudulently labelled products was immediate. There was no problem in tracing the meat product where the meat was produced, where it was processed, where it was stored. So the legislation is sound. Problems exist in the implementation and enforcement of the legislation and not in the legislation itself. Fraud arises when the rules are deliberately broken. We can refer to criminal sanctions and the importance of criminal investigations because there is a law. Had there been no law, there would be no criminal proceedings. But the existence of fraud, therefore, does not question the validity or the essence of the rules themselves, and nor, shall I add, should it undermine the internal market. We have this cornerstone, one of the cornerstones of the European Union is the freedom of circulation, of movement, not only of persons, but also of products and of services, and nothing should be done to undermine this freedom. Of course, when you have an internal market of 500 million consumers without barriers, once someone violates EU legislation, the consequence reverberates throughout the European Union and only in the country where that violation has taken place. And I repeat that in the European Union we have developed one of the best legislations in the world governing traceability and labelling, and proof that the system works is visible by the early identification of those involved in the production chain when problems arise. In the Agricultural Committee, I was asked, are you surprised that this question was discovered, this incident was discovered by the authorities of a member state, said, I'm not surprised at all, because it is the responsibility of the food safety authorities in the member states to implement this legislation. And this incident was discovered because the Irish authorities, in a random inspection on the cheapest beef burgers in a supermarket, discovered the presence of horse meat. So those who think that the European Union or the Commission has an army of enforcers, inspectors and wardens to implement legislation, whether in this field or in other fields, should know that there is nothing in existence of this sort, not only on food safety but on any other subject. And that the responsibility remains and has to remain in the hands of the member states, which does not mean that the Commission does not have a role in coordinating the inspections which take place before or after a crisis. And I do not mean, therefore, or I do not mean to suggest in any way that we should be complacent or that there are no lessons to be learned. However, it is important to keep matters in their proper perspective, to respond appropriately and not simply to knee-jerk in reaction. We know, Mr. President, that in incidents like this, even when there is no food safety issue at hand, reaction can be irrational, and there are already being felt certain economic consequences, even though this is not a food safety issue. We had in the past food safety issues where people actually suffered death, and some even had organs removed because of food safety issues. This is nothing of this sort, but it is still a serious case of fraudulent labour, because public confidence has been badly shaken. And part of the reassurance that we can provide lies in the way we respond, swiftly using the effective tools at our disposal and analysing data without delay. As this scandal unfolds, it confirms the importance of proper controls and dissuasive sanctions. As regards sanctions, you know that when we legislate, when you legislate a directive,